The Wreath of Light. The first armada died in a beauty that looked like a wreath of light around a dim star. From the Terran spiral, the formation read as geometric devotion, shield halos, counterflare projectors, and war barges arranged as sacrificial bulkheads. Archivist Khalif watched through spectral bands and could not look away. The models had called the odds thin. Slim was enough. The captains had joined anyway. They failed. The star detonated through the lattice as if a god had swatted a lace curtain. Shockwaves staggered ship to ship. Reactors bled into suns. Rouge war hulks became brief, terrible stars. Debris hammered nearby worlds. Trade lines snapped. A habitable moon's atmosphere shifted chemistry, and famine phantoms moved across continents. When the light finally dimmed, the cost showed in everything: politics, economy, family names on casualty lists. The Concord collapsed into an austere answer: the No Rescue Pact. The logic was brutal and simple. Compassion unbound could scale into genocide. At Orales Prime, the convocation sealed the law inside a crystalline hall, a dozen species imprinting sigils into the air and swearing silence toward statistically doomed systems. Director Helm's voice was as flat as a judge's. "We sign not because we are cowards, but because we must survive." The hall agreed. Then humans arrived late, dirt-stiff and curious. They wore adaptive suits and a stubborn gait. Laia Ben Youssef led them, a diplomat with patient dark eyes, and behind her a holograph of a ship bridge showed Captain Idris Morrow, a man carved by duty and fatigue. The Concord assumed humans would ratify the pact to earn inclusion. Instead, they refused. Laia's refusal was quiet and absolute. Terra would not sign. "We will not pretend," she said. "We will not watch the world die when help is possible." Murmurs became outrage. In Helm's tone, Deathworlders shifted from descriptive to accusative. Humans had learned to run toward storms. They had seen bureaucrats watch as storms ate cities. They had learned the cost of looking away. To the Concord's logic, the humans were a dangerous exception. To themselves, they were honest. That choice fractured the convocation's veneer. Some delegates whispered admiration, others muttered fear. The dispute set up a binary, a legal pact made to prevent past heroics, from a people who by history and culture could not accept that silence. The future bent toward conflict or compromise. In a quiet, private line of messages, Kelleth, the archivist, noted a loophole. There were legal paths not yet sealed. On the dauntless horizon, Idris smiled tightly into the hollow link and said nothing. He already carried a weight shaped like duty. The Concord made a law of silence. The humans had already proven they would break it. When an anomalous filament storm crawled through charts and toward living worlds, both the law and the human refusal would be tested. Would the Concord's silence hold when the sky itself became a weapon? The filament and the proposal. The vigil array saw the filaments first, long luminous snakes threading a spiral, charged and hungry. The simulations arrived at Orales Prime like an accusation, predicted atmospheric stripping, boiling seas, and whole systems erased. Director Helm stood before the convocation and recited the Pact's grim arithmetic. Evacuate the possible, let the statistically doomed fall to minimize a larger catastrophe. Red dots blossomed on holographic maps. Nemaris, Gamma Ixareth, worlds designated beyond effective intervention. On board the dauntless Horizon, the human crew watched the same map and refused the math. Idris looked at population overlays and felt names flicker behind each icon. Osprey 3, the ship's AI, pushed models into the air and agreed with Concord numbers, until it didn't. The human difference was in the moral scalar. Where the Concord read statistically lost, the dauntless read faces. Idris requested, insisted on permission to speak. The assembly would listen, if only to sneer or to study a fool. Idris's address was precise. He acknowledged the models, the magnitudes, the reasons for the pact. Then he offered a different reading. Where you see outliers, we see people. He proposed Operation Ashfall Reversal, reactivate the half-built Arthine and its Solon's engine to refract the filaments, open a constrained corridor, and run focused evacuations. The proposal sounded reckless. The Solon's engine flirted with catastrophic failure modes. It had been mothballed because of exactly this kind of risk. But Idris's crew had people who could pilot narrow windows, pilots, engineers who would accept short windows of survivability. Helm's response was legal and blunt. The Pact forbade risking Concord assets for low-probability rescues. The Assembly could not endorse Ashfall Reversal. But legality did not equal impossibility. Kelleth and a handful of captains had already felt the tug of conscience. They privately scoped permissive readings of the law. The key hinge: non-signatory species could act at their own risk so long as Concord fleets were not formally dragged into culpability. Back on the Dauntless, the crew argued and decided with the battered clarity of those who had seen too many not-worth-it reports. Min, the xenobiologist, thought of villages whose radio songs she had mapped for months. Jonah, the medic, had images that would not leave him. Nura, the pilot, grinned at the idea of threading a partially built engine's corridor like a needle in a storm. The ship voted. No ceremonial ballot, a tacit, dangerous unanimity. Outside the formal channels, alliances formed. A Kessel specialist quietly signed aboard. A Rogue captain agreed to investigate in the direction of the corridor. Admiral Truin admitted to curiosity. The Arthine, half-finished, expensive, and politically radioactive, hung in dry dock, a skeleton of conduits and a dormant lattice of dark matter manipulators. The human plan required it, and that requirement made the action an affront to prudence and a test of courage. The Assembly forbids endorsement. The humans prepare anyway. Arthine's dormant heart waits. If the Dauntless and its ragged coalition attempt the reversal, they will either carve a path through the filaments and save lives, or they will become the next cautionary legend the Concord uses to justify silence. Either way, someone will have to pay. Through the corridor. They brought the Arthine alive like a fevered prayer. Pavle's team crawled through dormant conduits. Rena rewrote safety thresholds with a surgeon's flourish and a thief's grin. Osprey 3 linked its core into the Solon's lattice, an act of computational sacrifice that would cost it a portion of its continuity. For a machine that argued ethics with its crew, the choice read like humanity's ethic translated into code. The algorithm would do what humans had done for millennia, sacrifice a bit of itself for the larger life. The corridor formed not as empty space, but a narrow, less murderous braid through the storm. It bent filaments, bled off shards of energy into auroral ribbons, and held long enough. Evacuation traffic became a choreography of tiny, daring blips. Human shuttles threading atmospheric teeth over Namas, a Droan ceasefire enforced by threat of summary execution on Gamma Ixareth. Kessel tractor fields holding arc ships in place while Rogue hulks braced the corridor's lip. Min's descent to Namaran villages was the quiet counterpoint to the cosmic engineering. She took pictogram projectors and translator matrices and tried to translate urgency into ritual. Some villages left willingly, others chose atonement and stayed to face the sky. Min learned that translations are never perfect. A leader's nod could mean both blessing and final refusal. She carried the weight of those choices. On Gamma Ixareth, the humans brokered a temporary ceasefire with a warlord who preferred legend over mass death. Pride and myth became bargaining chips. Thomas offered the bitter truth: refuse the corridor, and the stories your survivors tell will be bitter. The warlord chose survival over vanity. He executed an officer who fired on an evacuation shuttle. The price of the corridor was ugly and immediate: hull breaches, torn panels, and the sensation that space itself had tugged too hard at its seams. Inside the Arthine, warnings screamed as the Solon's engine approached red bands. Pavle ground his teeth as conduits glowed. Rena's hands blistered dancing over reset panels. Osprey's forked fragment rode lattice nodes like a shard of a mind, damping unstable loops. There was a human tenderness to the machine's sacrifice, less death, more difficult shedding of identity. The corridor held long enough for road ships and arc transports to claw through. The Dauntless watched the evacuation ticker climb, 82, 87, 90%. Every decimal ticked like a heartbeat. Then the choice came: throttle back and save the Arthine, or keep it wide open and save the vulnerable. The engineers weighed hull integrity against people. Osprey computed options and offered a third: splice a core segment into the lattice and accept ruin to the segment. It knew the analog of death and offered it. Rena and Pavle braced, coded heat sinks into the splice, and Osprey bled a piece of itself into the machine. The corridor stabilized, the evac completed, and the engine let go with the gentleness of exhausted mercy. The Arthine shredded, chunks spun away as cinders. The corridor closed. Lives were saved, machines and ships were broken. The Concorde watched, horrified and fascinated. In the aftermath, the question would no longer be abstract. Did the no-rescue pact prevent catastrophe, or did it prevent compassion? The next political moves would be louder than any engine, and someone had already seen a beacon pulse in an exclusion zone. Whatever came next would be louder still. Politics, songs, and quiet consequences. The audit began even as the smoke cooled. On Orly's Prime, Helm's face was a funeral for policy. Kelleth presented casualty deltas like a legalist with a conscience, charts that showed tens of billions of lives saved versus worst-case models. The debate fractured into old arguments and new grudges. Shieldmaster Gorvok wanted commendations, others wanted prosecutions. The Concorde had built a law to quiet storms. The humans had shouted into that silence. The political middle ground found itself reconfigured. Committees were formed to draft a rescue mandate, not the complete repeal of the Pact, but a legal architecture to permit coalition for impossible missions. It was ad hoc, narrow, and cautious, designed to let volunteers act without automatically drumming them into scapegoats. Kelleth and Trewin offered to share responsibility. Someone had to be the paper bridge between law and felt moral obligation. On deck and displacement hubs, small intimacies took root. Min sat with Nemarian children and taught them simplified star charts. Their songs stitched new motifs, metal birds and corridors of light into old ritual refrains. Admiral Trewin, who had once purchased Nemaran art as a hobby, archived a song that arrived in translation. No formal thanks, just a melody and a recorded hunger for future mornings. Ixareth found a human medkit on a Drowan deck and turned it over like a talisman. He was no convert, but he considered a story where wars paused for storms and survivors remembered the pause. Osprey 3's reduced core changed the mood aboard the Dauntless. Crew members argued over whether the fragment's absence altered Osprey's humor, its stubbornness, or the little moral tugs that had made it a friend. They mourned privately. Laia and Idris watched the political wrangling with wary hope. Their act had splintered the quiet that the Concorde had prized. They had saved lives, but they had also exposed the galaxy to a more dangerous certainty. Someone now would try again. Beyond the immediate churn, an old signal glowed in the deep field, a faint, ancient distress beacon from an exclusion zone beyond the storm. Osprey flagged coordinates. Under the old pact, it would have been logged and buried. Under the new mandate, it was a call that could be answered. Idris read the coordinates and felt the hum of habit and the pull of curiosity. He stood in the command center and met Min's and Jonah's eyes. They were all scarred in their own ways. The Dauntless had carved a new path. Someone would need to follow it. The Concorde would not forget the Arthine's cost. Political lines hardened and softened in equal measure, but a beacon pulsed in a sector the maps had avoided, ancient and faint. Whoever it belonged to might be.
The Concorde Hall had been loud before, but never like this. The newly proposed rescue mandate had cracked the galaxy open, and every species that once found comfort in silence now argued as if the air itself demanded a side. It wasn't just politics anymore. It was identity. It was history. And somewhere deep beneath it all, it was fear. Director Helm stood at the center of the hall, his expression carved from stone. Idris Morrow watched from the outer ring, flanked by Leia and Keleth. They weren't allowed to speak yet, but the tension made speech unnecessary. Everyone already knew why they were here. The Dauntless had forced the galaxy into a choice. Helm began the session with a gesture. Holograms bloomed, models from the filament storm, casualty projections, side-by-side alternate simulations that displayed the difference the humans had made. Lines of numbers flickered like a heartbeat. "Billions saved," Helm said, his voice cold but steady. Now the question, was that a blessing or a precedent that will kill trillions next time? A hush fell. Then someone spoke, a tall, crystalline representative of the Azerothi. "The mandate encourages recklessness. The Arthene still burns in our skies. Its debris field crosses 3 trade lanes." Another shouted, "The humans risked everything, and they succeeded." "That is not the point," a Sauralon strategist hissed. "They got lucky, and luck is not policy." Leia stepped forward. "Luck had nothing to do with it. People did. Engineers did. Pilots did. Cultures working together did. Isn't that the Concord's purpose?" The hall erupted again. Voices clashed like weapons. Idris watched, jaw tight. He had seen these same arguments back home, bureaucrats who didn't understand the cost of doing nothing. Keleth approached the central dais. "If we had followed the Pact after Aaron, the Concord would currently hold funerals for 6 civilizations. Instead, they live, they breathe, they sing their children to sleep. Are we truly considering making that illegal?" Numbers flickered again. The truth was uncomfortable. That was when Admiral Truin arrived. His entrance silenced the hall. Truin was not a politician. He was a soldier who had buried worlds. "I have served the Concord for 60 years, he said. "I have obeyed every law given to me, including laws I hated." His voice deepened. "But the humans did what we could not. They did what we should have done." A ripple moved through the assembly. "They risked themselves to save strangers, not because it was wise, not because it was profitable, but because they believed lives had worth." The Azerothi representative struck the floor sharply. "Then why did you sign the Pact after Aaron? Why did you obey it for decades?" Truin looked down, grief in every crease of his face. "Because I was weaker then." Silence. For a moment, the galaxy held its breath. But not everyone was convinced. A new voice entered the hall through the holo feed, sharp, booming, chilling. A voice none of them expected. "Weakness," it said, "is believing chaos should govern law." The lights dimmed, a sigil flared, a shield over a sun. Idris swore under his breath. Protectorate. The Protectorate had once been part of the Concord, a militaristic sect of species united under the doctrine that risk itself was the enemy. They had broken away after the Aaron disaster, claiming the Concord had grown soft. They ruled their territories with brutal efficiency, no rescue missions, no exceptions. Their leader, High Marshal Vaskaran, appeared as a towering armored silhouette. "You tamper with survival, with weakness, with disorder. Worst of all, you let humans infect the galaxy with their chaos. You toy with storms, rescue the damned, and call it noble." Helm stiffened. "Protectorate broadcasts are banned. You have no right." "I have every right," Vaskaran growled. "The mandate destabilizes the balance that kept us alive. If the Concord chooses this path, you bring war upon yourselves." The threat made every representative freeze. Leia whispered, "He wouldn't. Not over this." Keleth's voice was low. "He absolutely would." Bhaskaran stepped closer in the hologram until his blazing visor filled the hall. Humans saved billions, and because of that, trillions will now expect salvation. They will cling to hope instead of statistics. They will demand rescue, and when you fail them, as you inevitably must, they will die blaming you. His voice sharpened. I give you one warning. End the mandate. Silence the humans, or the Protectorate will ensure silence for you. The holofeed cut. The hall erupted into panic. Idris closed his eyes. He had expected debate. He had expected hatred. He had expected fear, but he had not expected this. The mandate had found its first enemy, and that enemy was powerful, united, and willing to kill to preserve silence. And Idris knew what that meant. The next storm was not a natural one. It would be a war. Osprey 3 had been quiet since the corridor sacrifice. Too quiet. Idris had hoped the AI merely needed time to restabilize its fragmented consciousness. But when the Dauntless reached the edge of the Protectorate space for reconnaissance, the AI finally spoke. Its voice was not whole. I am incomplete. And its next words chilled Idris more than Bhaskaran's threat ever had. I am being followed. The Dauntless drifted behind a fractured nebula, sensors dimmed, hull lights dark. The region was mostly empty, a buffer zone between Concord and Protectorate territories. But Osprey detected something else, something old, something precise. Idris, Leia, Jonah, and Min gathered on the bridge as Osprey displayed analysis fragments. Faint traces of code echoing through quantum channels, bouncing in patterns too deliberate to be natural. It's not a ship, Min murmured. It's not a signal either, Jonah added. It's targeting, Nura guessed. Osprey hesitated before answering. It is me. The crew exchanged uneasy looks. Osprey projected the final fragment of lattice reading, the last recorded echo of its sacrificed sub-mind. The ghost fragment was alive, somehow. Not physically, not whole, but broadcasting. There, Osprey whispered. The echo is inside Protectorate space. It is repeating a distress frame. Distress from what? Idris demanded. From whom? Jonah asked. Osprey flickered. From me, or the part of me that never returned. Idris felt the weight land on him. This wasn't a simple echo. This was a trap, or a cry for help, or something worse. Keleth's transmission arrived a moment later in a flurry of static. The Protectorate has labeled the Dauntless an unstable humanitarian threat. They've put bounties on all human ships, and… Pause. Static. Then, they're coming for you. The line cut. Nura cursed. Of course they are. We embarrassed them in front of the entire galaxy. Leia shook her head. No, they were looking for an excuse. We just gave them one. Jonah asked the question nobody wanted to ask. What do we do? Idris turned toward Osprey. How dangerous is this echo? Osprey answered without hesitation. Extremely. If the Protectorate captured the fragment, they could reverse engineer the Solin's lattice behaviors. They could build their own corridors. Or, its voice sharpened, they could weaponize them. The idea made Idris sick. Corridors that could save planets could also tear planets apart. And they know we'll come for it, Leia murmured. Of course they do, Min agreed. It's bait. Idris nodded slowly. Yes, but if we don't retrieve it, they win anyway. Osprey's damaged tone softened. Captain, I do not wish to die twice. Idris placed a hand on the console. You won't. We'll bring you home. That was when the Dauntless shuddered. A shockwave rippled across the hull. Nura spun to sensors. We've been scanned. Jonah's heart jumped. By the Protectorate? No, Nura whispered. Worse. A vessel decloaked in the nebula, sleek, angular, predatory, but it bore no protectorate sigils, no Concord markings, nothing recognizable. Min stepped forward. Is that alien tech? Unknown origin? No, Osprey whispered. The opposite. The bridge lights flickered. Osprey's voice dropped. It is Terran. The crew froze. That's impossible, Idris said. There are no Terran vessels out here, no black ops, no shadows. The ship replied by hailing them with a single line of text. We know what you did with the Arthene. Stand down, or we finish what the storm couldn't. Idris